Hey, I'm here with Module 2 of ELT series. Hope you watched Module 1, an introduction to ELT. If not, do watch it before you watch this one. I'm here to talk to you about key concepts in ELT. It includes difference between the following terms: acquisition learning, teaching learning, bilingualism, multilingualism, teacher-oriented classrooms, learner-oriented classrooms, and what is the difference between ESL, EFL in terms of learners and learning programs. Then L1, L2 acquisition, what is interlanguage? And the last one, a brief note on ESP. Before moving to the terms, let me remind you, L1 is first language, the language you learn first in life. In most cases, it's your mother tongue. For most Malayalis, L1 is Malayalam. And there are exceptions that I will explain in between. L2 is second language, the language that you learn after you learn your first language. For most of us, it is English. And in ELT, we are concerned about various ways of fruitfully internalizing English as a second language. Now, let's see the difference between acquisition and learning. Apart from ELT context, most of us use these words as synonyms, though we are aware that there is subtle difference between the two. In simple terms, these are two ways of internalizing language. That is very important, two ways of internalizing language. Acquiring a language is a natural process, not a conscious one, while learning is a conscious process, mostly in artificial environments. Looking at an example, say that of Sangeeta, the girl next door, Sangeeta's mother tongue is Malayalam, and it is a language that she internalizes first in her life. So her L1 or first language is Malayalam. She internalizes another language, English, after joining school. So that becomes her L2 or second language. It is better not to generalize this example because I think and don't think that MT or mother tongue is equal to L1. Mostly it is like that, but not always. For example, I have a niece Parvati, born and brought up in London. Even though her mother tongue is Malayalam, it is not the language she internalized first. She internalized English first. Her L1 is English, and later her grandmother taught her Malayalam. So her MT Malayalam becomes her L2 and not L1. I assume now you have better understanding of L1, L2 and MT. Now back to Sangeeta, our girl, the girl next door. As I told you, her L1 first language is her mother tongue, and that is Malayalam. Her L2, the second language, is English. Now, look at the process of internalizing the two languages. Her L1, MT, first language, that is Malayalam, and L2, that second language, English. How differently she internalizes these two languages. The difference is that she acquired L1, her first language, Malayalam, and she learned L2, the second language, that is English. It is easy to state in a sentence that she acquired L1, her first language, and she learned L2, her second language, that is English. But it is not an easy process. So let's see the process involved in acquisition and learning a language. Look at the chart. There are two columns, acquisition and learning. In the acquisition column, you can see it's implicit and subconscious, while learning is explicit and conscious. Implicit learning involves acquiring skills and knowledge without conscious awareness, that is, automatically and with no conscious attempt to learn them. Explicit learning refers to learner's conscious and deliberate attempt to master some material or solve a problem. Language is acquired through informal situations, but language is learned through formal situations. Acquisition depends on the attitude of the learner, and learning depends upon the aptitude of the learner. Language is acquired through natural environment and is learned in artificial environment. When one acquires a language, the first language, the mind of the learner is a clean slate. John Locke calls it a tabula rasa. But in the case of learning the second language, L2, the learner has already learned the sets of rules. There is always a comparison and contrast between the rules of the first language and the second language. Let me explain what we're discussing with the help of a bit of a theory put forward by Stephen Krashen. He's a professor emeritus at the University of South California who moved from the linguistic department to the faculty of the School of Education in 1994. He is a linguist and educational researcher. In the mid-1970s, Stephen Krashen differentiated language acquisition and language learning. Learning, according to him, is a conscious effort to learn rules resulting in the development of a knowledge system. In acquisition, learners internalize language without conscious effort from communicative context that they are naturally exposed to. Krashen, in his book, The Principles and Practice in Second Language Acquisition, which was published in 1982, explains the distinction between acquisition and learning and how the process of learning goes through. And the theory is called monitor theory. It has 5 hypotheses. Acquisition learning hypothesis is the first one, then monitor hypothesis, natural order hypothesis, and we have the input hypothesis and effective filter hypothesis. The first one is acquisition learning hypothesis. Let's see what it is. According to this hypothesis, acquisition is subconscious. Learning is a conscious process. Language ability depends on acquisition and not on learning. See, according to Krashen, there are 2 ways of developing language ability, that is acquisition and learning. Acquisition involves a subconscious acceptance of knowledge where information is stored in the brain through the use of communication. This is a process involved in acquiring mother tongue. Learning, on the other hand, is a conscious acceptance of knowledge about a language, that is grammar, structures, etc., through formal language instruction. According to this theory, the optimal way a language is learned is through natural communication. For second language teachers, it is ideal to create a situation wherein language can be used in real life situations. In turn, it will help students to acquire the language instead of just learning it. Second one is a monitor hypothesis. Here, he states that consciously learned language, not acquired naturally, consciously learned language can act as a monitor or as an editor. It can never be utterance interior or a source of voluntary speech. There will be individual variations in the monitor use. So we have the monitor over users who misuse monitor or use monitor all the time. They are very conscious about whether they are making mistake or not. So they use it all the time. So the second one category is the monitor under users. They prefer not to use monitor as much as possible and monitor optimal users. They are the ideal ones. They use monitor appropriately. He suggests that the monitor can sometimes act as a barrier as it forces the learner to slow down and focus more on accuracy as opposed to fluency. It will be a challenge for SL, second language teachers, to strike a balance between encouraging accuracy and fluency in students. Now coming to the third one, that is the natural order hypothesis. And here he states that acquisition, especially that of structures, follows a predictable sequence or order. Sequence or order does not change between the learners. Order is not affected by explicit instruction. Explaining it more, according to Krashen, learners acquire parts of language in a predictable order. For any language, certain grammatical structures are acquired early while others are acquired later in the process. This hypothesis suggests that this natural order of acquisition occurs independently of deliberate teaching and therefore teachers cannot change the order of grammatical teaching sequence. So the teacher should be aware that certain structures of a language are easier to acquire than others and therefore language structure should be taught in order that is conducive to learning. Teachers should start by introducing language concepts that are relatively easy for the learners to acquire and then use scaffolding to introduce more difficult concepts. Now to the fourth one, that is input hypothesis. Acquisition is better when learners receive messages that they can comprehend. It is termed as comprehensible input. The comprehensible input should be one step higher than the learner's language ability. It is a tricky and a challenging situation for L2 learners. Krashen represented it with a formula I+1, where I is learner's language ability and 1 is learner's comprehensive input. This hypothesis highlights the importance of using target language L2 in the classroom. The goal of any language program is for learners to is for learners to be able to communicate effectively by providing as much comprehensive input as possible, especially in situations when learners are not exposed to target language or L2 outside that of classroom. The teacher, the second language teacher, should create a more effective opportunity for language acquisition. Now to the affective filter hypothesis. An affective filter can act as an obstacle to language acquisition. The filter is turned up when influenced by negative emotional variables like fear, anxiety, stress, low self motivation, and low self esteem. This hypothetical filter or screen does not affect acquisition directly, but checks stops information reaching the language acquisition part of the brain. What does it signify? In any aspect of education, it is always important to create a safe, welcoming environment in which students can learn. In language education, this may be especially important since, in order to take in and produce language, learners need to feel that they are able to make mistakes and that is natural and they should be asked to take risks. Now, let me summarize Krashen's theory. There are two ways of developing competence in second language: language acquisition and language learning. Language acquisition is knowing language similar to the acquisition of L1 subconscious, and it develops a feel of correctness without learning the rules of grammar. It's implicit, it's informal. Language learning is knowing about language, and it is conscious learning of the rules of language. It is formal and explicit. Some theories assume that children acquire while adults learn. Krashen claims that adults can also acquire language and it does not disappear with puberty. A second language teacher should provide opportunities for the learner to acquire L2, not learn L2, but to acquire L2 so as to make it a natural process. Now, coming to the second one, that is teaching learning distinction. It is again a very familiar thing for us because you have seen teachers teaching, and as learners, you know what are the duties or what are things that you do as part of learning. But for the sake of something that is there in the syllabus, let me tell you a difference between teaching and learning. Teaching is an act of imparting knowledge, and learning is an act of acquiring knowledge. So that's what you see in the columns. And it was only an act of imparting knowledge earlier. Now that has changed to the act of being a facilitator and a stage setter. Teacher is not someone who comes not only someone who comes to the class and filled with knowledge, and he or she is to pour knowledge into your brains. He or she also acts as a facilitator and a stage setter. Now, the learning process has also changed. Here, the art of constructing learning has changed to the art of constructing knowledge. Now, you know that teaching is something that's performed by teacher. Nowadays, teaching machines also take a bit of effort. Now, the learning is performed by the learner. Teaching is not a lifelong process, but learning is a lifelong process because every experience is learning. That is what we say. Now, teaching is a conscious process, as we know, but learning can be conscious and subconscious. You learn things very consciously and you learn things without much conscious effort. Now, mostly self-motivated. Teachers are self-motivated. And in the learning, you see that it is extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. Both of these play a crucial part because you study for marks and you also study for the sake of knowing things. So, extrinsic and intrinsic motivation plays a role. Now, the context can be formal or informal in the case of teaching. And in the case of learning also, it can be formal or informal. In the formal situation, the professionals make use of this formal space for teaching. Then there will be objectives, methodology, and approaches. In the case of learning, in the formal context, there will be a structure in the whole learning process. You will have a curriculum, syllabus, timetable, and evaluation procedures. Now, all teaching has learning as its objective. So, whatever you try to teach, the objective is that you are trying to make someone learn something. So, that is the objective. All teaching might not result in learning. There is a great loss somewhere. There can be. Okay. Now, teaching will not be effective unless learning happens. So that is it. So it is not if a teacher comes to the class and teaches you that cannot be counted like you have learned everything out of the teaching process. Teaching will not be effective unless the learning happens. It cannot be said to be effective unless the learner learns something. And again, in the learning column, you can see that learning can take place without teaching. So it is not, you learn many things from the teacher, you learn things from your surroundings, from the media, from other places, from your family. So learning can take place without formal teaching. Now to the bilingualism and multilingualism. Bilingual speaks two languages, we know. A perfect bilingual speaks both languages as proficiently as an educated native speaker. Literacy is an added dimension to bilingualism, and it is termed as biliteracy. A person who learns L2 after L1 is termed as a sequential bilingual, and a person who learns L2 along with L1 is termed as a simultaneous bilingual. Now, there are informal and formal bilinguals. An informal bilingual is someone who learns language through informal learning setting context, and a formal bilingual is someone who learns language through formal setting or context. Now, there are early bilinguals and late bilinguals, something that's similar to the sequential and simultaneous bilinguals. Early bilinguals learn more than one language during childhood prior to the complete acquisition of another language. And late bilinguals learn a second language mostly after childhood, after a first language is already acquired. A multilingual speaks more than two languages. Multilingual speakers exceed monolingual speakers in the global population. People who speak several languages, they are called polyglots. Developments in ICT has increased exposure to multiple languages. Multilingual usually acquire a single language during the early years. Now, let's peep into teacher-centered classroom and a learner-centered classroom and see what is happening there. You have two columns there. One is for teacher-oriented or teacher-centered, and another one learner-oriented or learner-centered. So the teacher-oriented or teacher-centered classroom is based on behaviorist theory of learning. Behaviorism is one of the oldest theories of learning, and it is laid on rote memorization, practice, and drills. So a learner-oriented classroom, a progressive classroom, is based on a constructive theory, learning theory. That is, learners are there, help to construct knowledge by teachers. Now, the teachers in the classroom, it relies on curriculum, syllabus, and it is the center of learning. The process has all been relied on the curriculum. To finish the syllabus, the portions that have been allotted is what is the teachers in the classroom is concentrating on. The learners in the classroom, what you see is that their learner needs are taken into consideration, and it's central to learning. What the learner wants to learn is central to the learning process. In teacher-oriented classroom, the focus is on the product, and in the learner-centered classroom, the focus is on the process of learning. So I'll just explain an example. If teacher asks you to write an essay on development of English in India, in the teacher-centered classroom, teacher is only bothered of the final product that you produce. But the learner-centered classroom, teacher is bothered about the process of learning, how you arrive at certain conclusions, what is the research being done, how you took points, or how the information was collected, and how it was internalized, and how you arrived at certain conclusions. That is more important than the final product in the learner-centered classroom. Now, in the teacher-centered classroom, the activity is centered around the teacher. The learners are more or less passive. In learner-centered classroom, activity in the class is centered on the learner, and learners are active and teacher facilitates the learning process. Rote memorization is given importance in teacher-centered classroom, but critical and creative thinking is given importance in learner-oriented classrooms. Competition is high in teacher-centered classrooms, but cooperation is the key in learner-centered classrooms. It is knowledge-based, which one? The teacher-centered, but inquiry-based is a learner-centered classroom. Teacher is an information giver, evaluator, and students are empty vessels waiting to be filled with information from the teacher. But what happens in the learner-centered classroom is that the learners develop reflective thinking. Limited or no use of teaching aids and relies mostly on textbooks and worksheets. That is the case with most of the teacher oriented classes. But learner oriented classes, they make extensive use of teaching aids. Assessment is usually summative, that is year end or semester end or the term end assessment is usually summative. That is summative assessment, and formative assessment, that now and then assessment, is rarely used in teacher centered classrooms. Here in learner centered classroom, what you see is need based assessment, and most of the cases it's formative. Classes remain orderly. It is very good for the system because classes remain orderly, and teachers uh, has a full control over the class in a teacher centered classroom. Learner autonomy and independence is what you find in a learner centered classroom. Teacher is a model of the use of the target. That is a very positive point because from teacher you learn pronunciation, from teacher you learn the styles of language. And here, the learner centered classroom, teacher directs learning process, and in the students in the teachers in the classroom, students don't collaborate with the other students, and so there is no scope for developing communication skills. In learner centered classrooms, there's ample scope to develop communication through cooperative and collaborative strategies. Teacher oriented or centered classroom does not encourage autonomous study skills of the learners. Learner oriented centered classrooms, they encourage autonomous study skills of the learners. Teacher decides the content, methods of learning, and evaluation. Teacher-centered classroom, learners can choose content and the pace of learning in a learner-centered classroom. Teacher-centered classroom, it does not recognize individual difference in learners, believes in one-size-fits-all pedagogy. But learner-centered classroom, it recognizes individual difference in learners. Learners become independent of they become dependent on teachers in a teacher centered classroom. In learner centered classroom, there is a lot of independent learning, and that will help them for lifelong learning process. Teachers take full responsibility of learning process in the teacher centered classroom or teacher oriented classroom, but learners are responsible participants in the learning process. So I hope from this elaborate session you understood how the teacher oriented classroom is different from learner oriented classroom, and what type of classroom that you should provide for better acquisition of L2. Now let's see the difference between ESL and EFL. ESL, English as a second language, and EFL, English as a foreign language. In ESL communities, English is a predominant language for communication at work and for education, but not at home. Example, immigrant communities in Australia. In EFL communities, English is used only for international communication, not for internal communication, taught only at the secondary or elementary levels of education. An example for that is the way English is used in countries like Japan. Now, English language learning programs conducted around the world, it has been also given the title ESL learning program or EFL learning programs. It is differentiated on the basis of the native language of the country in which the program is conducted. ESL programs are conducted in countries where English is a predominant or primary language. It is for students to learn English as a second language in a foreign country where English is the primary language. Here, what happens is that students get direct exposure to language through media, popular culture, and also day-to-day life situations. Students are taught, or these students, they might have migrated to foreign countries for higher education and for job opportunities. EFL learning program is conducted in countries where English is not the native or primary language. It is for students to learn English as a foreign language in their homeland itself, and or in a country, in a foreign country where English is not the primary language. Students may not get direct exposure to language through media, popular culture, and day-to-day life situations, something that the ESL students get. But students get exposure to English, but only through the opportunities in the classroom. Position of ELT in India is unique. It's puzzling indeed. We cannot put it under watertight compartments with ESL or EFL label. In India, people use English as their first language, second language, or as foreign language, depending on their association with the language. Now to the L1, L2 acquisition, and that is acquisition and learning. So the first column you find L1 and second column you find L2. So L1 is the first language or the mother tongue in most cases. L2 is the second language, something that we have been talking all through this lecture. Then learners normally attain perfect L1 mastery. But in the case of L2, adult L2 learners are unlikely to attain perfect mastery. So success is guaranteed in as far as L1 is concerned, acquisition of L1 is concerned. Complete success cannot be guaranteed as far as learning of L2 is concerned. Usually learners, they do not vary in overall success or route in the learning process as far as L1 is concerned, but learners vary in overall route and success as far as L2 learning is concerned. See, in L1 acquisition, learners develop a notion or intuition about correctness. But in L2 learning, there is difficulty in arriving at correct grammatical judgments. People are always, in the confusion whether I'm talking in the right way or writing with the right grammatical structure. So there's a confusion among the learners. The L1 acquisition is intrinsically motivated, point that we were discussing in the beginning of the lecture, and L2 is mostly extrinsically motivated. And as said in the beginning, L1 is acquired and L2 is learned largely. Now to interlanguage. The term itself tells you that what is it all about. It has features of two languages, foreign and native, a simplified form of a language used by a known native speaker. The user will be in the process of learning the second language or the foreign language. Interlanguage theory is attributed to the American professor of applied linguistics, Larry Selinker. The process of L2 learning is not linear. It's fragmentary with quick progress in some areas, moderate in some others, and permanent halt in a few. It can fossilize or cease developing in any of its developmental stages. It is called fossilization. It results in the production of linguistic system, an appropriation of target language. And interlanguage is a hypothetical halfway between L1 and the target language. Now to the ESP, the last but not least. Use of English in a specific context explained by the learner's need. It includes business English, technical English, scientific English, then English for medical professionals, English for tourism, etc. There are three main reasons for the emergence of ESP. The first one is demands of the world after the World War II. Expansion, science and technology, English became the language of technology and commerce and research. This created a demand for a generation of learners who needed the language for specific purpose to tech and commercial use. Now, the second one is a revolution in linguistics. Shift of focus from grammar to communication. Realization of language variation from context to context, and a rise in the expansion of research in English for science and technology and for business. Now, the third one and the last one is the development in educational psychology, which is again a part of which again led to the development of ESP. There was a shift of focus towards the student-centered learning from teacher-centered learning, of course. Learners are seen to have different needs and interests, and which have influence on their motivation to learn and therefore on the effectiveness of learning. The standard way of achieving this was to take text materials from the learner's area of study or work. English courses, according to their needs, would improve the learner's motivation and make learning better and faster. So these are the three reasons for the emergence of ESP, and that is English for special purposes. Now, with this, I have come to the end of the presentation on key concepts in English language teaching. We will meet you soon with another module, that's module 3 on methods and approaches of ELT. If you have any doubts, queries related to topic discussed, mail me at ashlit.com@gmail.com. ashlit.com, all in small letters, @gmail.com. Till then, bye-bye, take care. Stay safe.